The phone rang at 2:41 a.m., slicing through the quiet like a blade drawn too cleanly to ignore. Naomi Carter stirred beneath the weight of silk sheets, the city of Chicago breathing in low, distant rhythms beyond the glass. She reached for the phone with the reflex of a woman whose life was built on patterns, data, probabilities, outcomes. Late-night calls usually belong to clients who mistook urgency for importance. "Hello?" Her voice was calm, trained, almost kind. "Mrs. Cole." The woman on the line spoke softly, indulgently, as if savoring a private joke. "I thought you deserved to know your husband is with me right now." Naomi sat up. The words did not shatter her. They landed with a careful cruelty, precise and deliberate, like a stone placed exactly where it would bruise most. The woman continued, unhurried, rehearsed. "He comes every Wednesday, says you work too much, says I make him feel seen." Naomi listened. That too was instinct. She had built her career by listening, not to what people said, but to how they said it. The pauses, the breath between sentences, the pleasure disguised as concern. Then something changed. A sound, low, male, unmistakably familiar, slipped into the background. Ethan's laugh. Not the warm one he used at dinner parties. This was colder, sharper, almost amused. "Wait," the woman whispered. "What is that? Why do you have folders like this?" Silence stretched, thin as glass. "You weren't supposed to open that," Ethan said, faint but clear. The woman's breathing fractured. "There are names, dates. Oh my God, there's more than one of us." Naomi felt the room tilt, though she did not move. "What is her folder?" the woman asked, voice breaking. Why does she have so many files?" Ethan laughed again, a sound without affection, without heat. "Oh," the woman breathed. "Oh no." The call ended. Naomi stared at the dark screen, her reflection hovering there like a stranger she had yet to meet. The humiliation had been intended for her. She understood that now. The call was meant to wound, to reduce her to a footnote in her own marriage. But something had gone wrong. She rose from the bed and crossed to the window, pressing her palm to the cool glass. Below, the city glimmered, quiet, patient, indifferent. Somewhere in that lattice of lights, her husband was smiling, believing himself in control of a story he thought he had written alone. Naomi did not cry. She did not scream. She did what she had always done when the numbers stopped making sense. She paid attention. And if you've ever felt that small, disorienting moment when a single truth rearranges everything you thought you knew, stay with this story. Listen closely. Notice the details. Sometimes the most important revelations arrive in whispers, and they reveal themselves fully only to those willing to look again, think deeper, and follow the thread to its end. Morning arrived gently, as if the night had not fractured anything at all. Pale winter light slipped through the curtains, tracing familiar shapes across the bedroom Naomi had shared with Ethan for 3 years. The coffee machine hummed from the kitchen on its programmed schedule. Outside, the city exhaled into a new day. Ethan lay beside her, asleep, his breathing steady and untroubled. There was something almost tender in the way his hand rested near hers, not touching, but close enough to suggest intention. Naomi watched him for a long moment, studying the face she had learned by heart, the clean lines, the calm confidence, the expression that had always made her feel chosen. She remembered how they met. A charity gala overlooking the river, his easy laugh cutting through polite conversations, the way he listened when she spoke about her work as if her words mattered. He had called her brilliant before he ever called her beautiful. She had taken that as proof of something rare. Their marriage had grown on assumptions so reasonable they never demanded examination. That love meant encouragement. That respect meant giving space. That trust meant never needing to look too closely. When Ethan said, "You don't need to worry," she believed him. When he said, "You're overthinking this," she softened her questions. When he praised her independence, she mistook it for admiration rather than convenience. Naomi had always been a woman who moved carefully through the world, But in love, she had allowed herself to rest. She assumed that intimacy was protection, that marriage was visibility, that being known meant being safe. She rose quietly and padded into the kitchen. The mug Ethan favored waited beside the kettle. She filled it without thinking. 2 sugars, just enough milk. Muscle memory was its own kind of devotion. As the coffee brewed, she leaned against the counter and let the past arrange itself with unsettling clarity. The late meetings that never quite aligned with deadlines. The way he deflected emotional conversations with charm instead of answers. How disagreements always ended with her apologizing for being too intense. None of it had felt cruel. That was the danger. It had felt reasonable, polished, adult. She sipped her coffee and stared out at the muted skyline, the buildings rising like witnesses who never interfered. For the first time, she considered a question she had never allowed herself to ask. What if the marriage had not been built on lies, but on her willingness to believe what was easiest? Ethan appeared in the doorway, tying his robe, his smile warm and unguarded. "Morning," he said, leaning down to kiss her temple. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she replied, and this time it was the truth. "You work too hard," he murmured, not unkindly. "One of these days you'll learn to rest." She watched his reflection in the dark window as he spoke. The words landed differently now, not as concern, but as a subtle correction, a reminder of who he believed she should be. When he left for work, promising dinner and apologizing for another long day, Naomi stood alone in the quiet apartment. The silence no longer felt peaceful, it felt intentional. She walked back into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, fingers pressing into the sheets where he had slept. The assumptions she had built her marriage on did not collapse all at once. They loosened, gently, like threads being pulled from a beautiful garment. Love, she realized, was not the absence of doubt. It was the courage to look directly at what stood in front of you. And for the first time since the call in the night, Naomi allowed herself to wonder, not whether her marriage could be saved, but whether it had ever truly been what she believed it was. Naomi did not confront Ethan. That, too, was a choice. By the second morning after the call, something in her had settled, not into calm, but into stillness. The kind that comes before a storm decides which direction it will take. She understood with a clarity that surprised her that truth did not always reveal itself to those who demanded it loudly. Sometimes it stepped forward only when invited by silence. So she tested him, not with accusations, not with questions sharpened like knives, but with softness. At breakfast, she mentioned, casually, almost carelessly, that she might fly to Milwaukee the following week for a client meeting. She watched his face in the reflection of the toaster's chrome surface, the way his eyes flickered for half a second too long. "Oh?" he said. "I thought that account was already wrapped." "It is," she replied lightly. "They want a follow-up." He nodded, smiled, reached for his phone. Too smooth, too quick. The answer came before the thought. Later that afternoon, she texted him a photo of a new dress hanging in a boutique window. "Thinking of this for the conference dinner," she wrote. There was no conference dinner. She watched the typing bubbles appear, disappear, then return. "You'll look incredible," he replied. "Always do." No question, no curiosity, no interest in the details. Praise without presence. That night, she suggested, almost shyly, that she might scale back her hours. "Just for a while," she said, tracing the rim of her wineglass. "I feel like I've been missing too much." Ethan looked at her with an expression that once would have felt like relief. Now it struck her as calculation. "I don't want you to change who you are for me," he said gently. "Your ambition is one of the things I love most about you." It was the same sentence, word for word. She had heard it before, months ago, perhaps years. Naomi felt a chill slide down her spine. Love, she realized, should evolve. This did not. It repeated. Over the next few days, she altered small variables in the life they shared, like a scientist adjusting conditions in a controlled experiment. She came home early without warning. She canceled plans at the last minute. She asked open-ended questions and waited. Ethan adapted flawlessly, too flawlessly. Every response matched the version of her he expected, not the woman she was slowly revealing. When she leaned closer, he leaned back just enough. When she grew distant, he offered affection on schedule. It was choreography, not connection. One evening, she stood in the doorway as he prepared for bed, watching him move through the room with practiced ease. He noticed her gaze and smiled. "What?" he asked. "You're looking at me like I'm a stranger." The word landed with a quiet weight. "Just thinking," she said. "Dangerous habit," he teased, kissing her forehead. She smiled in return, but inside something precise clicked into place. He did not know when she was watching. He did not know what she was measuring, and most importantly, he did not know she had stopped performing. That night, as Ethan slept, Naomi lay awake, her mind moving with deliberate grace. The test had been simple. The results were undeniable. This marriage was not built on misunderstanding. It was built on predictability. And predictability, she knew better than most, could be studied, mapped, and eventually dismantled. In the quiet dark, Naomi turned her face toward the window and let the city's distant glow sharpen her resolve. The first test was complete. She had not changed him. She had revealed him. There are moments when a woman feels the world tilt, quietly, almost politely, before it falls. Naomi had learned in her work that the most catastrophic shifts rarely arrive with fireworks. They arrive with a small anomaly, a number that didn't match, a pattern that refused to behave, a silence that lasted 1 second too long. On the fourth night after the call, Ethan came home later than usual, carrying the scent of cold air and expensive cologne. He kissed her cheek with practiced warmth, murmured an apology about a meeting that ran long, and moved through their apartment as if it belonged to him by natural law. Naomi responded the way she always had, soft laughter, gentle concern, a hand on his arm. The performance felt like a dress she could wear without believing it belonged to her. After dinner, Ethan's phone buzzed twice. He glanced down, then turned the screen face down on the table. A small gesture, a familiar one. Once, she would have called it respect for their time together. Now she recognized it as stagecraft. When he finally went to shower, Naomi stood in the kitchen for a long moment, the faucet running, though she wasn't washing anything. Water filled the room with its steady sound, hiding the quieter ones, her breathing, her heartbeat, the decisive step she was about to take. His laptop sat on the far end of the counter, as casually placed as a book abandoned mid-chapter. Naomi had never touched it without asking. In their marriage, privacy had been treated like a sacred thing. She realized with a strange bitterness that the sacredness had always been one-sided. She wiped her hands, approached the device, and opened it. The screen woke with a soft glow. A login page stared back at her, impersonal and absolute. In another life, she would have hesitated, but hesitation belonged to the Naomi who still believed she was being loved. She watched the cursor blink, patient as a metronome. Ethan's passwords were not romantic. He was not that kind of man. Naomi thought of the things he valued: control, efficiency, the satisfaction of being right. She tried one, then another. On the third attempt, the laptop unlocked. The simplicity of it was almost insulting, like he had never imagined she would try. A desktop appeared, minimal, clean, professional. A man's idea of order. Naomi's eyes moved swiftly, instinctively, as if reading a room. Her fingers found the file explorer. At first, there was nothing. The usual structure: contracts, project documents, spreadsheets. Then she saw it, an unassuming folder with a neutral name, buried as if it were an afterthought. Naomi clicked. The screen populated with subfolders, dozens of them, arranged with meticulous precision. Names, initials, dates. Her throat tightened. She opened one. Photographs filled the screen. Hotel lighting, half smiles, women captured at angles that suggested permission and intimacy. Some were taken in places she recognized: a conference suite with a view of the lake, a private dining room she and Ethan had once visited on an anniversary. The warm glow of a resort they discussed but never booked. Naomi's fingers hovered above the trackpad as if touching fire. Her stomach turned, but she did not look away. She could not afford to. She opened another folder, and another. The women were different, but the framing was the same. Posed like proof, arranged like a collection. In one, a woman sat on the edge of a bed, her makeup smeared, her eyes red with tears. The photo had been taken from a distance, as if her grief were entertainment. Naomi's skin prickled. She closed it quickly, then forced herself to open it again. She needed to know what kind of man she had been sleeping beside. There were screenshots of messages, clipped and saved. There were notes in plain text files, observations, patterns, emotional weaknesses. Words like attachment style and compliance appeared, cold and clinical, as though he were analyzing machinery rather than human hearts. Her breathing grew shallow. She steadied herself by placing her palm flat against the counter, grounding her body in something real. Then she saw a folder near the bottom. It wasn't a name. It was 2 letters. NC. Naomi's hand trembled as she clicked. For a moment, the screen stayed blank, as if the laptop itself had taken a breath. Then it loaded, and Naomi felt something inside her go eerily quiet. Photos of her, sleeping, showering, dressing, moving through rooms in their home, captured without her knowledge. Zoomed angles, time-stamped images, her privacy shattered into pixels. And beneath the photos, copies of her bank statements, a list of her clients, notes about her work schedule, a document titled Behavioral Triggers. Naomi swallowed hard, tasting metal. This wasn't betrayal. This was surveillance. Somewhere down the hall, the shower turned off. Water ceased, leaving a sudden silence that pressed against the walls. Naomi's fingers moved faster now, no longer hesitant, driven by a terrible need to see the full shape of what had been hidden. She scrolled until she found a file near the bottom of the folder, a video icon with a name that made her blood go cold. The plan. Her cursor hovered above it, trembling like a heartbeat. In the bedroom, a drawer closed. Footsteps began, soft, unhurried, moving toward the kitchen. Naomi clicked play. The video opened without ceremony, as if it had been waiting for her. A dim room, warm with amber light, the soft clink of glass, the suggestion of a bar, not the kind of place people went to be honest, but the kind they chose when they wanted to feel invincible. Naomi leaned closer, her breath caught in her throat. Ethan's voice filled the speakers, smooth, controlled, faintly amused. He was speaking to someone off camera, a low murmur threaded with confidence. "She's disciplined," he said. "That's what makes her valuable." The word struck her first. Valuable. Not beloved, not cherished. Valuable like property, like leverage, like a figure on a ledger. The camera shifted slightly. A hand entered the frame. Male, pale-skinned, wearing a watch that cost more than most people's rent. Another voice replied, calm and professional. "She doesn't suspect anything?" "No," Ethan said. "She thinks my privacy boundaries are proof of respect. She's proud of being the mature wife. I give her just enough affection to keep her stable." Naomi's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter until her nails bit into her skin. She didn't feel pain. She felt distance, an expanding space between who she had been and who she was becoming. The other man chuckled softly. "And the divorce timing?" Ethan took a sip, then spoke as if discussing a construction schedule. "Soon. I'm adjusting it. She's starting to watch me more. Not enough to act, but enough to notice patterns. I need it to look like a natural breakdown. Her work, her neglect, her emotional unavailability." The screen flickered for a moment, then steadied. Naomi watched Ethan's mouth form words she would never unhear. "I've been documenting everything. Late nights, trips, times she chose clients over me. I'm building a narrative. The court won't care about truth. It'll care about the story with the cleanest evidence." Naomi's vision blurred, then sharpened again, as if her eyes had decided tears were a luxury for later. The man off camera asked, What about the others? The women you're seeing? Ethan laughed. The same laugh she had heard in the middle of the night, cold and clean, like a blade that enjoyed being sharp. They serve different functions, he said. Some are useful for networking. Some are for practice. The point is repetition. You learn what works on women by doing it over and over. Naomi's stomach turned as though her body rejected the air in the room. You make it sound like training, the other voice said. It is, Ethan replied easily. Women are patterns. They think they're unique, but they react the same when you apply the right pressure. Praise them, then starve them. Make them doubt themselves. Offer comfort at the exact moment they're about to break. It's simple once you stop pretending they're complicated. Something inside Naomi went very still. Not numb, precise. For years, she had built models to predict human behavior. She had taught companies how to speak to desire without insulting intelligence. She knew that people were complex, contradictory, tender in places they pretended were steel. Ethan's confidence was not strength. It was arrogance sharpened into cruelty. The video continued. She's a black woman with a reputation for being sharp, Ethan said, and Naomi's chest tightened. If she ever pushes back, I'll frame it as aggression, emotional instability, paranoia. She'll be careful. She's always careful. That's why she'll lose. The other voice replied, lower now, more cautious. You're sure you can control the outcome? Ethan leaned back, relaxed, smiling as if the world had never denied him anything. I've done it before. The sentence fell into Naomi like a stone dropped into deep water. It did not splash. It sank, heavy and final. The camera angle shifted again, showing a brief glimpse of the man across from Ethan. Only a jawline, a collar, a glimpse of a ring. Someone intimate enough to share strategy. Someone who sounded like law and certainty. Naomi's mind reached for possibilities, but the video never offered a name. She did not need one, yet. She paused the file. The kitchen became suddenly too bright, too exposed, every surface reflecting her like a witness. Her gaze drifted back to the folder on the screen, NC, and she scrolled through what she had avoided at first, the documents beneath the photos. A spreadsheet titled Asset Map, a list of her clients with notes beside each, influence, vulnerability, potential leverage, a printed scan of her passport, a copy of her apartment lease from before marriage, even a screenshot of a private message she had sent to a friend about feeling lonely lately. Words she had typed in trust, now preserved like ammunition. Then she saw a smaller file, innocuous in its name, and when she opened it, her hands went cold. A set of transcripts, typed, time-stamped, of her conversations. Snippets from dinners, from calls, from moments she had believed were private. The words were hers, but they no longer belonged to her. Naomi pressed her palm to her chest, as if she could physically keep her heart from slipping away. It wasn't only that Ethan had betrayed her bed. He had stolen her privacy, her voice, her image, her right to exist without being studied like prey. From the hallway came the faint sound of footsteps nearing, unhurried, familiar. Ethan was coming back into the room with the ease of a man who believed his home was a kingdom. Naomi didn't close the laptop. She didn't panic. She reached for her phone instead, her movements slow and deliberate, like a woman smoothing a dress before stepping onto a stage. Her screen lit, reflecting in the dark window behind the laptop. Two versions of her face. One stunned, one awakening. Somewhere deep inside, fear tried to rise. But something stronger answered first, a quiet, terrible certainty. If Ethan had written a plan, then Naomi would write one too. And hers would not be built on assumptions. It would be built on truth. Ethan's footsteps softened as he neared the kitchen, the way a man moved when he believed he was returning to something he owned. Naomi heard the faint rustle of his shirt, the casual exhale as he adjusted his cuffs. Ordinary sounds, domestic sounds, that suddenly felt rehearsed, like background music laid over a lie. She closed the laptop. Not because she feared him, not because she was finished, but because she understood timing now. Truth was not just information, it was a weapon, and weapons required control. Ethan entered with damp hair and a relaxed smile, his presence filling the room like a familiar perfume. He leaned in behind her, kissed her shoulder, and slipped his hands around her waist, as if affection could erase the distance he had created. "Couldn't sleep?" he murmured. Naomi tilted her head slightly, letting his breath brush her skin, letting the gesture land where it used to. The tenderness of it almost made her ache, not for him, but for the woman she had been when this touch meant safety. "Just thinking," she said. "Don't," he replied with a soft laugh, as if it were a flirtation. "You'll scare yourself." She turned, offered him a faint smile, and watched how his eyes searched her face, not for love, but for compliance, for the calm he expected, for the certainty that he still controlled the temperature of her world. He poured himself water, checked his phone, then set it down with the screen hidden. A small habit, a neat habit, a habit that now looked like practice. When he finally went to bed, Ethan fell asleep quickly, like a man who never carried guilt long enough for it to bruise him. Naomi lay beside him and listened to the rhythm of his breathing until it smoothed into the deep, thoughtless cadence of rest. Then she rose. The apartment at night had a particular kind of silence, the hush of expensive walls built to keep the city out. Naomi moved through it barefoot, her steps absorbed by the carpet. She returned to the kitchen and reopened the laptop, this time with the quiet confidence of someone no longer guessing. The folder NC glowed on the screen like a bruise that refused to fade. She scrolled again, not through the photos, she could not bear them twice, but through the lesser files, the ones Ethan believed were harmless because they were boring. Names without images, date stamps, notes labeled with neutral titles. And that was when she found it. A file called screen capture _02-41 AM. Her breath caught. The timestamp matched the call. Naomi clicked, and the screen shifted into a recording, grainy at first, then sharpening. It showed Ethan's laptop from his own perspective, the camera capturing what he had been doing just before the call was placed. The edges of the frame trembled, as if he'd started recording casually, maybe to save evidence, maybe to preserve control. The mistress's voice was not on this video, but her presence was, implied in the way Ethan spoke, the way he angled the screen, the way his laughter came in short, amused bursts. Then Naomi saw it. Ethan opened a folder, one of the women's names, and inside were photographs, arranged neatly, each one a trophy wearing a different face. The cursor hovered. His hand, barely visible, moved the trackpad. The folder list appeared again, and for a brief, careless second, he clicked the wrong one. NC. Naomi watched her own life unfold from the inside of a stranger's hands. The video showed the folder opening, her name reduced to initials, her privacy transformed into files. The screen filled with images, her sleeping face, her bare shoulder, the curve of her back as she stepped from the shower. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't rush to close it. He simply let it sit there, exposed, as if he wanted the other woman to see. A moment later, the cursor moved lower and clicked another file within the folder. Asset map. Then another. Behavioral triggers. Then a note titled Public Narrative. Naomi's fingers went cold on the trackpad. She felt her pulse in her throat. The recording captured Ethan's voice, low, amused, almost affectionate in its cruelty. "You wanted to feel special," he said to someone off camera. "Now you know what special looks like." A pause. Then the faintest sound, the mistress's breath, fast, shallow, fracturing. Not mockery, not triumph, fear. "What is that?" she whispered. Ethan laughed softly. "That," he said, "is why wives are the best investment. They take longer, but they pay out cleanest." Naomi's stomach tightened, not with nausea, but with a kind of grief so sharp it felt like clarity. A romantic grief, the mourning of a love that had been real to her, even if it had only ever been a performance to him. The mistress's voice rose in panic. There are other women. There are folders, so many folders. Ethan's response was calm, almost gentle. Of course there are. And then, like the sound of a door locking from the inside, Naomi understood the true shape of the midnight call. It had not been a random act of cruelty between two women fighting over a man. It had been a calculated spectacle. The mistress called to humiliate Naomi because Ethan allowed it, encouraged it, perhaps even arranged it, knowing jealousy was a fire that could be aimed. But Ethan had also, in that same moment, revealed the thing he never intended the mistress to see, that she was not his lover. She was a tool. And Naomi was not his wife. She was his final project. The recording continued for only a few seconds more. Ethan's cursor moved, almost lazily, toward a file Naomi hadn't noticed before. A document with a name that made her breath stop entirely. Exit timeline. The mistress must have seen it too, because her voice came again, thin and terrified. "What do you mean, disposal?" she whispered. "What do you mean, phase 2? Then the video cut out abruptly, as if the phone call had started, as if the world had shifted, exactly when Naomi's own phone had rung that night. Naomi sat back slowly, her chair whispering against the floor. The kitchen felt colder, though nothing had changed. She brought a hand to her mouth, pressing her knuckles against her lips to keep herself quiet. Not because she wanted to silence pain, because she knew, now, that pain would become power only if she held it steady. In the dark window above the laptop, Naomi's reflection watched her back. Eyes wide, face pale, but something new inside them. Something waking. Something that did not beg. She closed the video. And in that moment, the story shifted again. Not in Ethan's favor, not by accident, but by choice. Because Naomi finally had the answer to the midnight call. And answers, she knew, were where strategies began. Naomi did not sleep. She lay beside Ethan's warm, careless body and listened to the soft certainty of his breathing, the way a man rests when he believes no one is watching. For years she had loved that sound. It had meant home. Now it sounded like a lock clicking shut. Before dawn, she rose again, quiet as a thought, and returned to the kitchen where the laptop waited like a confession half-spoken. The screen greeted her with the same cold brightness. She opened the folder once more, not with trembling now, but with a composure that felt almost unfamiliar. She had entered a different kind of intimacy, the one that exists between predator and prey when the prey finally learns to read the hunter's footprints. The folders were endless, the names blurred into a catalog of faces. Yet the deeper she looked, the less personal it became. The women were not lovers. They were variables, each one a trial, a refinement, a step in a method. And what terrified Naomi most was not the volume of betrayal, it was the order. She found a document titled Relationship Architecture. Inside, Ethan had written as if he were designing a building, not a life. Phase 1, acquisition, charm, mirroring, attention that felt like worship. Small gifts delivered at the precise moment a woman began to doubt her worth. Phase 2, dependence, isolation disguised as romance. I just want you to myself. Gentle criticism wrapped in praise. Subtle discouragement of friendships framed as protection. Phase 3, control, financial entanglement, emotional confusion, the careful rewriting of reality until the woman no longer trusted her own instincts. Phase 4, exit, public narrative, legal pressure, reputation management, a final act of kindness to make the victim doubt her anger. Naomi's gaze tracked the words until they stopped being letters and became a mirror. She had lived those phases. She recognized the sequence the way you recognize a song you didn't realize you'd memorized. A sharp ache climbed her throat. She swallowed it down and kept reading. Then she found the subfolder marked Prior Settlements. It was smaller than the others, tucked away with a kind of care reserved for dangerous things. Inside were scanned court filings, bank statements, and typed summaries labeled with names that were not romantic, not tender, just identifiers. Claire H., marriage number 1. Dana R., marriage number 2. 2 prior wives, documented like case studies. Naomi clicked the first. A photograph loaded. A woman with soft eyes and a tired smile, standing in front of what looked like a bakery storefront. The image was dated nearly a decade ago. Beside it was a file titled Outcome. Naomi opened it and felt the air leave her lungs. The summary was written in Ethan's voice, detached, economical. Claire had owned the bakery outright. Ethan had entered her life during an expansion phase, offering support, suggesting financial restructuring, encouraging her to sign certain documents for tax efficiency. The divorce settlement stripped her ownership. The business was leveraged, then lost. Claire had left the city, moving into a small rental on the outskirts, her reputation damaged by whispers Ethan had planted about mismanagement and instability. Naomi's fingers hovered over the trackpad, numb with rage. She opened the second. Dana's file contained fewer photos, but more numbers. A nonprofit director admired in her community. Ethan's notes described how he framed her work as noble but naive, how he subtly convinced donors she was disorganized, how he positioned himself as the stabilizing influence. Then came the collapse, her credit ruined, grants withdrawn, a public narrative that painted her as emotionally volatile. There was even a section titled Pressure Points. Naomi stared at those words as if they might burn through the screen. Pressure points, like a body, like a throat, like a woman's ability to breathe freely. And beneath both wives' folders was something that made Naomi's skin tighten. A spreadsheet labeled Learnings. Ethan had measured outcomes the way a strategist measured campaign performance. What worked? Public sympathy, slow isolation, early financial blending, controlled conflict. What didn't? Women with independent legal counsel, women with strong community ties, women who documented early. The notes ended with a line that felt like a verdict. Next target must have higher assets and a stronger public profile. The fall must be decisive. Naomi leaned back slowly, her spine straight, her face lifted as if she needed air. The kitchen seemed too small for what she now carried. She pressed her fingertips to her lips, not to hush herself, but to steady the tremor that wanted to become grief. This was no longer about love. It wasn't even about sex. Infidelity would have been almost merciful, an ordinary human weakness, a flaw born of desire. But Ethan's deception was not weakness, it was design. It was a practiced cruelty that grew more refined with every woman he broke. Naomi thought of Claire's bakery, the smell of bread in the morning, the pride in a woman's hands as she builds something honest. She thought of Dana's nonprofit, the quiet labor of saving others, the way women like her carried whole worlds without demanding applause. Ethan had not simply left them, he had engineered their ruin. And then, like the final insult, Naomi found a note titled, "Why this one will be final." She opened it. The words were brief, almost casual. Naomi Carter, highest earning potential, limited family ties in city, high tolerance for stress, values privacy and professionalism, likely to avoid public conflict. If executed correctly, this closes the cycle. Naomi read it twice. Limited family ties, high tolerance for stress, likely to avoid public conflict. He had mistaken her composure for softness. He had mistaken her silence for surrender. He had studied her strengths and labeled them weaknesses because he could not imagine a woman holding power without eventually bending to him. She closed the file and sat motionless, listening to the apartment breathe. In the bedroom, Ethan shifted in his sleep, making a sound that might have been a sigh or a smile. Naomi pictured him waking later, kissing her forehead, calling her beautiful. The tenderness would be real in its performance, the way an actor believes in a role while still knowing it is not life. For a moment, grief rose, pure and sharp. The grief of realizing that the love she had offered was genuine, and that genuineness had been used against her like a tool. But grief did not stay in her. It changed shape. It hardened into something quieter, something cleaner, something that did not require tears. Naomi looked again at the folders, at the phases, at the learnings. The pattern was clear now, repeating with the patience of a machine. And in that clarity, she understood the most important truth of all. This wasn't a betrayal. It was a system, and systems, no matter how cruel, could be dismantled. Naomi understood, with a clarity that felt almost merciful, that knowledge alone would not save her. Truth was a light, but light could also make you visible. So she began, not with confrontation, but with protection. The morning after she mapped the pattern, she moved through the city with the measured grace of a woman performing ordinary errands. She wore a coat she had owned for years, took streets she walked often, smiled at the barista who knew her order. Nothing about her suggested urgency. Nothing about her revealed that she had quietly stepped out of the life she used to inhabit. At a cafe near the river, she opened a new account on her phone, one Ethan would never see. She routed her consulting income there, adjusting payment instructions with the precision she brought to client systems. It felt strange, siphoning pieces of herself back into safety, like reclaiming breath after being underwater too long. That afternoon, she rented a small storage unit under her maiden name and placed copies of her passport, birth certificate, and academic records inside. She scanned contracts, encrypted files, and uploaded them to a cloud Ethan had never touched. She changed passwords, not to sentimental words, but to phrases that described truth as she now understood it. That evening, she called her oldest friend, Maya, and said only one sentence they had agreed upon years earlier, a sentence meant for emergencies neither had wanted to imagine. "If I disappear," Naomi said quietly, "check the blue folder." There were no explanations. None were needed. Maya inhaled sharply on the other end of the line, and Naomi heard resolve settle into her friend's voice like armor being fastened. "I'm with you," Maya said. "Whatever you need." City, Naomi realized, did not always look like escape. Sometimes it looked like preparation, slow, deliberate, invisible. She researched attorneys late at night, choosing one who specialized in coercive control and financial abuse rather than simple divorce. She scheduled a consultation under a pseudonym, careful not to leave a digital trail that could be traced back to her. She learned the language of restraining orders, asset freezes, emergency filings. The words felt clinical, but beneath them ran a current of something intimate, self-preservation. At home, she played her role with exquisite restraint. She laughed when Ethan joked. She listened when he spoke. She allowed him to believe his control was intact because she understood now that his confidence was his greatest weakness. He mistook calm for compliance. He mistook silence for ignorance. At night, when he reached for her, Naomi learned to inhabit her body differently. She did not disappear into affection. She remained present, alert, cataloging details the way she once cataloged market shifts. Tone, timing, pressure. She noted how easily tenderness became entitlement, how love in the wrong hands turned transactional. There were moments, small, treacherous moments, when fear crept in. When she imagined what might happen if Ethan sensed the shift. When she remembered the spreadsheets labeled pressure points. When she considered the cost of being seen clearly by someone who had already proven himself capable of calculated harm. During those moments, Naomi did not panic. She slowed down. She breathed. She reminded herself that survival was not cowardice. It was intelligence expressed under threat. One evening, as rain traced thin silver lines down the windows, Ethan mentioned, casually, that a friend of his had gone through a messy divorce recently. He spoke with practiced sympathy, shaking his head. "People get ugly when they feel cornered," he said. "You never really know someone until you see what they'll do to protect themselves." Naomi met his gaze across the table, her expression soft, unreadable. "I think," she said gently, "you always know. You just choose not to see it." He smiled, untroubled. The remark slid past him, harmless as air. Later, alone in the bathroom, Naomi locked the door and pressed her forehead to the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked composed, even serene. But beneath that calm ran a fierce, unwavering resolve. She was no longer trying to save the marriage, she was saving herself. And in that shift, subtle, irreversible, something profound took hold. For the first time since the call in the night, Naomi was not reacting. She was designing an exit that would leave her whole. Survival, she discovered, was not dramatic. It was elegant. Ethan began to tighten the story the way a man tightens a tie before stepping into a room where he expects applause. It happened in small adjustments first, subtle, almost affectionate. He started coming home with flowers more often, but the bouquets felt oddly impersonal, as if he had chosen them from memory rather than desire. He asked after her day with the practiced warmth of someone who knew the correct questions, not the true answers. And when Naomi spoke, he listened with that familiar gaze, steady, charming, faintly amused, like a man watching a performance he believed he had directed. Naomi kept her face soft. She gave him nothing sharp enough to cut himself on. One Tuesday evening, he suggested they take a walk along the river after dinner. The city air was cold, and lights trembled on the water like scattered coins. Ethan slipped his hand into hers, fingers interlacing with a confidence that once would have felt like belonging. "You've seemed distant lately," he said gently, eyes forward, voice pitched to concern. "Not in a dramatic way, just like your mind is always somewhere else." Naomi looked at him and saw the craftsmanship, the careful softness, the lack of accusation. A man who wanted her to confess without feeling forced. "I've been tired," she answered. "True enough. Work has been heavy." He nodded, as if he had predicted that exact sentence. "I worry about you," he said. "About us. You're so strong, Naomi, but sometimes strength becomes a wall." The words were delicate, sugar-coated. Yet Naomi heard the structure beneath them, praise that carried a quiet correction, a compliment that left bruises if you held it too tightly. She smiled faintly. "I didn't realize I was building walls." "I'm not blaming you," he murmured quickly, too quickly. "I love your ambition. I've always loved it. He exhaled like a man suffering bravely. "I miss you." For a moment, the old Naomi might have softened completely, might have stepped into his sadness and tried to heal it with her own body, her own guilt, her own surrender. But that Naomi had been built on assumptions. This Naomi simply listened. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her under the glow of a street lamp. The wind lifted her hair, and he reached to tuck a strand behind her ear with the tenderness of a man who wanted witnesses. If not from the street, then from her own heart. "You know," he said, voice lowered, "I've been thinking about what our marriage needs. Not what society says, not what your friends would say, just what we need." Naomi waited. Silence was a mirror, and Ethan could not resist looking into it. "I think we should talk to someone," he continued. "A counselor, or maybe just start having honest conversations. No defensiveness, no spreadsheets in your head." He smiled, teasing, as if it were intimacy. Naomi kept her expression calm. "Honest conversations sound healthy." Relief flashed across his face. Tiny, quickly hidden. He assumed agreement meant surrender. He assumed her composure meant she was still pliable. He pressed on. "I don't want this to become one of those marriages where people stay together out of habit," he said, and Naomi felt the quiet pivot in his tone. A gentle turn from romance into control. "I want us to choose each other on purpose." It was beautiful language. That was the danger of him. Ethan could wrap a blade in silk and still call it a gift. That weekend he planned a dinner at home. Candles, music, a wine he claimed he'd bought for a special night. Naomi watched him move through the kitchen with ease, playing the husband he could be when it served him. He cooked well, laughed easily, kissed her knuckles as if he still believed tenderness was his birthright. Halfway through the meal, he set his glass down with a subtle finality, like a judge preparing to speak. "Naomi," he said softly. "I need to ask you something." Her heart remained steady. She had been waiting for the script to reach this page. "Do you still feel happy?" he asked. The question was carefully constructed. If she said yes, he could claim she was in denial when he later filed. If she said no, he could frame the divorce as mutual necessity. Either way, he would appear reasonable, mature, heartbroken in the right places. Naomi lowered her eyes, letting vulnerability settle into her face like a veil. She did not lie. She curated. "I don't know," she whispered. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing at being present." Ethan's gaze softened, not with love, but with satisfaction. This was the confession he wanted, her offering him the weapon before he even reached for it. He leaned forward, voice gentler than the night air. "I don't want you to carry that alone," he said. "We've both been under pressure, but I think we need to consider something, Naomi, something difficult." He paused, letting the weight build, letting her imagine the worst so he could appear kind when he spoke it. "What?" she asked quietly. "I think we should talk about separation," he said, as if it hurt him to say it. "Not because I don't love you, but because maybe love isn't enough if we're living like strangers." There it was, the first official step of his exit phase, delivered in a tone so tender it could almost pass as mercy. Naomi's hands remained still on the tablecloth. She let her breath hitch, just slightly, as if the words had stabbed her somewhere delicate. She watched Ethan's face, the way he held the expression of reluctant sorrow, the way he waited for her to break, to plead, to promise change. But Naomi did not give him the satisfaction. Instead, she lifted her eyes slowly, glossy with carefully chosen emotion, and whispered, "If that's what you really believe we need, I won't fight you." Ethan blinked, just once, the faintest flicker of surprise. Then his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but might have been if you didn't know how closely to look. He reached across the table for her hand, thumb stroking her ring as if claiming it one last time. "Thank you," he said, voice warm with false relief. "Thank you for being mature about this." In his mind, the story had resolved itself neatly. He believed he had guided her to the edge and convinced her it was her own idea to step closer. He believed he was winning because he could not imagine a woman silently building an outcome he had not approved. Naomi squeezed his hand back, gentle and steady, like a bow. And while Ethan savored his victory, Naomi listened to the quiet inside herself, the sound of certainty settling into place. Let him think he was winning. Men like Ethan walked most confidently toward the moment they were about to lose everything. Naomi chose her dress the way a woman chooses her words when she knows they will be remembered. It was not the most glamorous thing she owned, nor the most provocative. It was quiet elegance, deep navy silk that softened the strength of her posture without diminishing it, sleeves that suggested restraint, a neckline that revealed nothing she did not intend. She pinned her hair back with a single pearl clip, the kind Ethan had once admired because it made her look polished. Tonight, she wanted polished. Polished meant believable. At her throat, resting just above her pulse, was a pendant that looked like a simple piece of jewelry. Clean lines, understated shine. No one would think it held a microphone fine enough to catch a whisper, a confession, the subtle cruelty of a man who believed his wife was too gentle to fight back. Ethan arrived with roses and a smile that belonged on a magazine cover. He kissed her cheek, held her waist as if guiding her into a photograph, and suggested a restaurant near the river, one tied to their early days, when he had first made her believe that love could be both safe and thrilling. The dining room glowed with candlelight and quiet money. Waiters moved like shadows between tables. Conversations stayed low, private, expensive. Naomi let herself sink into the atmosphere as if she belonged there, which she did, though Ethan had always behaved as if he had brought her into this world. He ordered wine with familiarity, speaking to the sommelier like a man who enjoyed being recognized. Across the table, he watched Naomi with gentle satisfaction. "You look incredible," he said. I miss seeing you like this. Present, not thinking about work. Naomi smiled, the curve of her mouth warm enough to reassure him. Maybe I'm learning. His eyes brightened at the bait. He wanted to believe that he had already reshaped her. They spoke about safe topics first. Weather, a mutual friend's new condo, a client Ethan claimed he was courting for a major development deal. Naomi listened, nodded, laughed softly at the right moments. All the while she watched him the way she watched a room before presenting a strategy. His pacing, his pauses, the way he touched his glass when he needed control. He kept checking his watch, as if counting down to a moment he had rehearsed. Dessert arrived, a delicate plate arranged like art, something sweet designed to soften whatever came next. Ethan waited until the waiter left, then set his fork down, aligning it carefully beside the plate. The gesture was small, but Naomi felt the shift in the air. His performance was moving into its central scene. Naomi, he began, voice low and heavy with what looked like regret. I've been thinking a lot about us. She leaned in slightly, as if drawn by devotion rather than calculation. Okay, I don't want to hurt you, he said, which was always how he introduced the hurt. But I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Naomi's hands remained folded on the table, still and graceful. She let her eyes glisten, just a touch, as if his words were carving into something tender. What isn't fine? She asked. He exhaled slowly, as though burdened by love. You're absent, he said. Not physically, but emotionally. You live inside your mind and your work. I feel like I'm married to someone who's always somewhere else. The sentences were measured, carefully phrased. Naomi could almost see the bullet points behind them, the script he would later claim as evidence of years of neglect. I try to reach you, Ethan continued, voice softening. I try to tell you what I need, but you're always tired, always busy. And I'm lonely, Naomi, lonely in my own marriage. There it was, the victim narrative. The man abandoned by the brilliant wife, the saint who tried. Naomi lowered her gaze, letting silence stretch for 2 heartbeats longer than normal. Silence made people feel it. Ethan could never resist. I think, he said, we should consider a trial separation, just to see if life is better apart, if we're forcing something that's already broken. Naomi's chest tightened, but her expression remained delicate, controlled. She lifted her eyes, voice trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from craft. Are you saying you want a divorce? Ethan's lips parted, as if the word itself hurt him. I'm saying, I don't know, he replied smoothly. But I've spoken to someone about options, about how to handle this in a respectful way. I don't want this to get ugly. He said it like a gift, like mercy. Naomi's heart beat steadily beneath the pendant, the device capturing everything. His tone, his phrasing, the subtle blame, the implication that her ambition was a moral failing. She swallowed, looked down at her hands, then looked up again with a softness that invited him closer. Is there someone else? She asked, gently, as though the idea pained her. For the first time, his composure flickered. It wasn't fear, just irritation, as if she had stepped off script. No, he said quickly, smoothing it over. This isn't about another person. This is about us, about compatibility, about what I need in a marriage. He reached across the table and took her hand, thumb brushing her ring, an intimate gesture meant to suggest sincerity. I need a partner who chooses the relationship, he said, not just the world outside it. Naomi let her breath catch. She let her shoulders soften. She let him believe she was folding. Then she did something that shifted the entire dinner. She squeezed his hand back. If you really believe separation is what you need, she whispered, then I won't trap you. Ethan blinked, surprised by her acceptance. I love you, Naomi continued, voice low and careful, a note of surrender woven into it. And if loving you means letting you go, I can do that. The words were beautiful. Ethan's face softened with satisfaction. He wanted a wife who dissolved into grief, who handed him the moral high ground. Instead, she gave him something even better: cooperation. He exhaled as if relieved. "Thank you," he murmured. "I knew you'd understand." Naomi tilted her head slightly, letting her eyes shine as if they were filled with fragile hope. "I just have one request," she said. "Anything. Can we keep this between us for a little while?" she asked softly. "I need time to process, time to breathe. I don't want anyone to know until I'm ready. And I don't want lawyers yet. Not until I feel steady enough to think clearly." Ethan's smile returned, gentle and approving. He believed he had just secured the most valuable thing of all: her silence. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need." They finished dessert in a haze of polite conversation. He talked about logistics, sleeping arrangements, schedules, the possibility of staying friends. His voice was warm, tender, almost affectionate. Naomi listened as if each word mattered, while inside she counted the evidence being gathered, the way a woman counts exits in a room before she trusts anyone with her back. Outside, the night air cut clean and cold. Ethan wrapped his coat around her shoulders, drawing her close as they waited for the car. To strangers, they would have looked like a couple weathering a difficult conversation with grace. Ethan kissed her forehead, the same gesture that used to make her feel cherished. "I hope you know," he said, "this isn't easy for me either." Naomi leaned into him, allowing the illusion to hold for one last breath. "I know," she whispered, but what she knew now was not what he meant. She knew the dinner had done exactly what she needed it to do. She knew every gentle word had been recorded. She knew his victory was a mirage he was walking toward with perfect confidence. And as the car door closed behind them, Naomi rested her hand lightly against the pendant at her throat, feeling the steady pulse beneath it. The quiet proof that the story had changed hands. The morning after the dinner, Naomi woke before the sun, before the city had begun its daily insistence on motion. Ethan was still asleep, sprawled with the confidence of a man who believed the world would wait for him to decide how it should turn. She lay beside him and studied his face in the dimness, the familiar lines, the handsome symmetry, the mouth that could form tenderness in cruelty with equal ease. Once she had watched him like this and felt gratitude. Now she watched him the way one watches a door they intend to walk through, with attention, with intention, with the quiet knowledge that there was no returning. Naomi slipped from the bed and dressed without sound. In the bathroom mirror, she paused, meeting her own eyes. She looked composed, almost serene, but she felt like a woman walking with fire held carefully inside her chest. In the kitchen, she poured coffee, but didn't drink it. She simply wrapped her hands around the mug and let the warmth steady her. She checked her phone once. A message from Maya. "I'm awake. I'm ready." Naomi exhaled slowly. The world did not change when you made a decision. It changed when you acted on it. By 9 o'clock, she was seated in an office on the 47th floor of a downtown building where the elevators rose in silent lines like vows. Her attorney, Lena Hart, was not theatrical. She was precise, black, sharp-eyed, with a voice that carried authority without needing volume. The kind of woman who had learned to read men like Ethan without ever granting them the pleasure of her fear. Naomi placed a slim folder on the table, cleanly labeled, nothing dramatic. Inside were copies of the screen capture, the asset maps, the transcripts, and the audio file from the dinner. Lena flipped through the documents once, then again more slowly, her expression tightening not with shock, but with recognition. "This isn't a messy marriage," Lena said quietly. "This is coercive control with financial intent." Naomi's throat tightened at the phrasing. It made the nightmare sound orderly. It made it real. Lena leaned back. "We filed today." Naomi blinked once. She had expected hesitation. From the system, from the law, from anything that liked to pretend women must suffer before they are believed. Yet Lena spoke with the calm finality of someone who understood the danger of waiting. "If you don't file first," Lena continued, "he controls the timeline. He'll move money. He'll contact your clients. He'll shape a narrative before you even realize it's being written." Naomi nodded. I want protection. You'll have it, Lena said, but we do it clean, fast, quiet. They moved like surgeons. By noon, emergency motions were drafted. A request for an interim restraining order, an order preventing harassment, and a petition for temporary financial injunctions. Lena contacted a forensic accountant to flag irregular transfers and identify hidden assets. Naomi signed papers with a steady hand, her signature flowing across the page like a final line in a chapter she had outgrown. Every time her pen lifted, she felt a strange mixture of grief and relief, as if her heart were learning to breathe without the weight of his hand around it. When they finished, Lena slid the final document toward her. "This is the filing," she said, voice softening. "Once you sign, you don't go back to pretending." Naomi held the pen above the paper. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic far below. She thought of the woman she had been, generous with trust, careful with her love, proud of her ability to handle things privately. She thought of how Ethan had studied that pride and built a trap inside it. Then she signed. The ink dried quickly, as if even the paper understood there was no time for sentiment. By late afternoon, the petition was entered. A court officer was assigned. Ethan would be served at his office the next day. There would be no warning, no opportunity for him to rearrange the board. Lena's voice was calm when she spoke again. "Now we secure your body, not just your assets." Naomi had already planned for that. Quietly, elegantly, she did not return to the apartment that night. Instead, she drove to a small, furnished space Maya had arranged. Nothing luxurious, but safe, with blinds that closed completely and locks that clicked with satisfying certainty. Naomi carried one bag, a laptop, a few clothes, her documents, and a small box that held the only sentimental things she refused to abandon. Her mother's ring, a childhood photograph, a letter she had written to herself years ago about the kind of love she deserved. As she placed the box on the nightstand, her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Last night was hard, but I'm proud of us. Proud of how mature you're being. I love you." Naomi stared at the message until the words blurred, then sharpened again. It was astonishing how easily he weaponized love, how smoothly he wrapped praise around a plan designed to destroy her. She did not reply. Minutes later, another message arrived. "I'll stay at the condo tomorrow. Give you space. We'll talk next week like you asked." He believed he was giving her time. He did not know that next week had already been taken from him, folded neatly into legal filings in sealed envelopes. Naomi set the phone down and walked to the window. The city beyond was unfamiliar from this angle. Fewer glittering towers, more ordinary streets, more honest light. She watched cars glide through wet pavement, their headlights reflecting like thin ribbons of gold. For a moment, grief rose, gentle, aching, because even a false marriage leaves real bruises. She mourned the version of Ethan she had loved, the future she had imagined, the softness she had offered without being asked to prove it. But grief did not undo her. It only reminded her what she was protecting. Naomi turned away from the window and began making the next list. Numbers to call, accounts to monitor, names to warn. She moved with a quiet devotion, not to revenge, not to drama, but to survival that looked like dignity. Filing first was not a romantic gesture. It was an act of self-respect so profound it felt like love. Love, finally, turned inward. The day Ethan was served, Chicago's sky wore a dull, pewter color, as if the city itself understood that something sharp was moving beneath the surface. Naomi sat at a small table in Maya's spare apartment, hands folded around a cup of tea she could barely taste. She wasn't waiting for him to respond. She was waiting to see which version of him would arrive. The charming husband was a costume. The wounded man was a script. The predator was the truth. At 10:17 a.m., her phone began to vibrate with his name. Once, twice, 3 times. Naomi let it ring until the screen went dark. She listened to the quiet afterward, the space where panic used to rush in. It didn't. She had already mourned the marriage. What remained was a case. A voicemail followed almost immediately. "Naomi, What the hell is this? Ethan's voice was strained, still trying to sound reasonable, still trying to keep the mask in place. You told me you wanted time. You told me you didn't want lawyers involved yet. Call me back. We can fix this. Another call came, then another. By the fourth, the mask tore. You're humiliating me, he snapped, his tones sharpened by disbelief. You're making a huge mistake. Do you understand what you've started? Naomi's fingers stayed steady as she forwarded each voicemail to Lena Hart. Then the text messages arrived, quick bursts of pressure dressed as concern. This is not who you are. You're acting paranoid. Your friend is filling your head with nonsense. We had an agreement. The word agreement made Naomi's mouth go dry. It was how he framed control, as a mutual decision she had broken. It was how he weaponized her decency against her. At noon, Ethan tried a different door. Maya's phone rang first, then Naomi's colleague, then an old mentor Naomi hadn't spoken to in months. He moved like a man flipping switches in a building he believed he owned, testing which lights he could still control. Naomi learned about it through a message from her assistant at the consulting firm where she contracted. Ethan called the office, said you were going through a mental health crisis, asked if we'd noticed you behaving erratically. Naomi read the text twice. The words sank in slowly, like ink bleeding through paper. Mental health crisis. Not only did he want to take her assets, he wanted to take her credibility. Because if he could make the world doubt her sanity, it wouldn't matter what evidence she had. People were always eager to believe a woman was unstable, especially when her calm had been inconvenient. Naomi's hands tightened around the phone, and for a moment her throat burned with the urge to scream. Not in fear, in fury. She didn't scream. She called Lena. Lena listened without interruption, then said, very softly, "He's doing exactly what men like him always do when they lose the timeline." Naomi stared at the wall, breathing carefully. "He's contacting my clients." "I know," Lena replied. "He already reached out to two. He framed it as protecting them from your unpredictability." A cold nausea rolled through Naomi, not because she doubted herself, but because she recognized the strategy. Ethan wasn't trying to win in court yet. He was trying to win the world. "Here's what we do," Lena said, voice calm as a blade lay gently on a table. "We document everything, and we go on offense without giving him theatrics." By evening, Naomi's inbox contained the evidence of Ethan's counterattack. Emails from his business account checking in on people who had no reason to be checked on. Messages to mutual friends suggesting Naomi had become obsessive. A carefully worded letter sent to a board member of a nonprofit Naomi advised, implying she was emotionally compromised. He wasn't raging. He was planting seeds. Naomi sat in the apartment's dim living room while Maya moved quietly around her, setting down water, placing a blanket over her shoulders. Maya didn't ask questions. She simply existed beside Naomi, like a steady shoreline. "Do you want me to call him?" Maya asked once, voice low. Naomi shook her head. "No, he wants emotion. He wants noise." She lifted her phone and looked at Ethan's last message. "If you keep pushing, I will ruin you. I built you up. I can tear it down faster." The sentence was almost tender in its arrogance, like a man reminding a woman of her place. Naomi's eyes stung, not with tears, but with the sharpness of memory. Ethan's hand on her waist at events, his voice praising her brilliance. The way she had allowed herself to believe she was safe because she was loved. Love, she realized, could be mimicked. Control couldn't help revealing itself. A knock came at the door. Maya checked the peephole, then opened it to reveal Lena Hart in a dark coat, her expression composed, her presence grounding. "We have enough for an emergency protective order," Lena said as she stepped inside. "The intimidation, the client interference, the harassment." Naomi nodded slowly. "He'll escalate." "Yes," Lena said, "but he'll also get sloppy." Lena placed a folder on the table, printed copies of Ethan's communications, timestamps highlighted, Witness statements already drafted. He wants you to feel isolated, Lena continued. So we expand your circle. We notify your firm's legal counsel. We send a formal cease and desist. We brief your key clients first before he poisons them. Naomi's chest rose and fell in a controlled breath. He called me unstable. Lena's gaze sharpened. Then we show stability the way the law understands it, through evidence, timelines, and restraint. That night, Naomi drafted a single message to the clients Ethan had targeted. Short, dignified, and factual. No drama, no pleas, just a clear statement that a private legal matter was underway, and any third-party contact should be forwarded to her attorney. Lena reviewed it, tightened a sentence, removed a word that sounded too emotional. Even Naomi's calm needed to be strategic now. Near midnight, Ethan called again. Naomi watched the phone light up, his name glowing like a warning sign. She didn't answer. She let it ring into silence, then forwarded the missed call log to Lena. A new voicemail appeared. This time, Ethan's voice was quieter. "You think you're smarter than me," he said, and the calmness in his tone was more frightening than his anger. "You think you can expose me and walk away clean." He paused, letting the silence become a threat. "I know what you've been doing," he continued. "I know you accessed my laptop. I know you stole files. I can make you look like the criminal, Naomi. I can make you look like the one who invaded privacy, who manipulated the story. Don't test me." Naomi closed her eyes. It was the same inversion he used in the marriage. Accuse her of the very thing he had done, so she would doubt her own right to defend herself. Projection, sharpened into law. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at Maya and Lena, two women sitting in her living room like quiet guardians, like witnesses Ethan could not erase. "I want to be ready," Naomi said, voice soft but steady, "for whatever he tries next." Lena nodded. "Then we get ahead of it." The next day, Naomi's firm issued a formal notice. All communications regarding Naomi must go through counsel. A restraining order request was filed. Ethan's messages were attached. Witness statements included the attempts to damage her professional reputation. And because Ethan had reached beyond marriage into finance, Lena forwarded the most damning materials to a financial crimes investigator who owed her a favor, and who, unlike polite society, was not easily seduced by charm. Ethan wanted to counterattack by making Naomi small. Inside, he had widened the battlefield. That evening, Naomi sat alone for a moment with the pendant in her palm, its smooth metal warmed by her skin. She thought of the woman who once believed romance meant being chosen. Now she understood romance could also mean choosing yourself, quietly, fiercely, without asking permission. Ethan thought he was winning because he could still make noise. But Naomi was building something stronger than noise. She was building a record. And records, unlike men, did not lie for love. The first woman reached out at dawn. Her message was brief, almost formal, as if emotion were something she had learned to ration. "I was married to Ethan before you. I think I can help." She signed it with a name Naomi had seen before, quietly, clinically, on a scanned court document tucked into a folder labeled Prior Settlements. Naomi sat at the small desk by the window and read the message twice, then a third time, letting the words settle into their proper weight. The city was waking, light lifting itself onto brick and steel, and with it came the unmistakable feeling that a door had opened somewhere she had not known existed. By noon, there were two more messages. One came from a woman whose voice shook when she finally agreed to speak. She lived several states away now, in a house that looked nothing like the one she had once shared with Ethan. "I thought it was my fault," she said softly, as if confessing a sin. "He told me I was too sensitive, too proud, too difficult to love." Naomi listened, saying nothing, the way you listen when the truth is finally breathing on its own. The third message arrived late in the afternoon, sent from an email address that did not carry a name. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I know him." They met 3 days later in a conference room borrowed from Lena's office. Neutral walls, soft lighting, a table large enough to hold distance without demanding it. Naomi arrived first, arranging her notebook and water glass with careful hands. She felt a tenderness she had not expected, an ache that had nothing to do with Ethan, and everything to do with what it cost women to be believed. The first woman entered quietly, her posture guarded, her eyes observant. She introduced herself as Claire. Her handshake was firm, practiced, as if she had learned to be taken seriously by strangers. She chose a seat with her back to the wall. "I didn't want to come," Claire said, sitting down. "But when I heard he tried to paint you as unstable, something in me snapped." Naomi nodded. "Thank you for being here." The second woman arrived moments later. Dana, taller, visibly nervous, clutching her bag as if it were a shield. She offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and sat close to the table, leaning forward like someone ready to defend herself. The third woman came last. She paused in the doorway as if unsure she was welcome, her hand resting on the frame. She was younger than Naomi expected, her beauty unguarded, her expression brittle with fear. She introduced herself with a single name and no last initial. "I was never his wife," she said quickly. "I don't want anything. When I saw your name come up in his messages, I realized what he'd done to me wasn't personal." Naomi stood and crossed the room without thinking. She placed a glass of water in front of her and said gently, "You're in the right place." They sat in silence for a moment, four women bound by something none of them had chosen. The air felt charged, not with anger, but with recognition. Claire spoke first. "He always started the same way," she said, "like he was studying you, remembering things you didn't realize you'd revealed. It felt intimate. I thought it meant he cared." Dana nodded slowly. "He made me feel impressive, like my work mattered more when he validated it. And then," her voice faltered, "then he started correcting me. Just small things, facts, memories, until I couldn't tell what I actually knew anymore." The younger woman stared at the table. "He told me you were cold," she whispered, "that you didn't appreciate him. He said I was different, that I saw him." Naomi felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Not jealousy, not shame, but grief for the ease with which women were taught to compete for scraps of decency. "He told each of us the same story," Naomi said quietly, "just with different names." They talked for hours. They spoke of dinners where apologies turned into accusations, of documents signed in good faith, of moments when intuition flared only to be extinguished by a smile and a gentle, "You're imagining things." They compared timelines, phrases, gestures, and watched the pattern align with sickening precision. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a folder she had carried for years, unopened. "I kept this because I thought someday I might need to remember that I wasn't crazy," she said. Inside were emails, financial statements, notes scribbled in the margins of court papers, evidence waiting for a witness. Dana slid her phone across the table. "I saved the messages where he told me to calm down after I asked about missing money," she said. "I didn't know what they meant at the time." The younger woman hesitated, then unlocked her phone and played a voicemail. Ethan's voice filled the room, soft, reassuring, patronizing. "You're overreacting. You know how emotional you get." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "He counted on our silence," she said, "on our belief that no one would want to hear this." Claire laughed once, bitter and bright. "He didn't count on us talking to each other." There was a shift then, subtle but unmistakable. Something loosened, shoulders lowered, breaths deepened. What had once been private shame began to transform into shared clarity. They did not speak of revenge. They spoke of truth, of telling it plainly, of allowing the record to reflect not one woman's pain, but many. By the time they stood to leave, the room felt altered, as if it had absorbed their courage and would not forget it. Naomi walked them to the elevator, one by one. When the doors closed behind the last woman, she remained in the hallway, palm pressed lightly to the cool metal. For years, Ethan had relied on isolation, on the careful dismantling of solidarity, on the belief that women would always doubt themselves more than they doubted him. He was wrong. Because when women spoke, not in whispers, not in fragments, but together, the silence he depended on collapsed. And in its place stood something far more dangerous than anger. Witness. Justice did not arrive with a dramatic slam of doors. It arrived the way winter arrives in Chicago, quietly, steadily, without asking anyone's permission. In the weeks after the women met, Naomi watched Ethan's world begin to tighten around him, not because she chased him through the streets, but because truth has a way of narrowing a liar's options until he can no longer pretend there are exits. The first consequence was procedural. Lena filed supplemental evidence: the recorded dinner, the screen capture, the intimidation voicemails, the client interference. The court responded with something Ethan had never been able to charm his way out of: an order written in plain language, stamped with authority. No contact, no harassment, no third-party messaging. Ethan violated it within 48 hours. He didn't do it loudly. He did it like himself, through a mutual friend who sent Naomi a message that sounded concerned, urging her to be reasonable and think of Ethan's reputation. The friend didn't realize she was a messenger in a war. Or perhaps she did and chose convenience. Naomi forwarded the message to Lena, then deleted it from her phone as if it were dirt. Lena's reply was brief. Good. He just gave us more. The second consequence was financial. The forensic accountant traced unusual transfers from Ethan's accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, moved like chess pieces trying to escape the board. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Ethan had started to move money the moment he realized Naomi was no longer obedient. But the motions were already filed, the requests already made, and when the judge signed the asset freeze, Ethan's carefully hidden streams stopped flowing. He called his attorney, then another, then another. Each one asked the same questions, each one less charmed by him than the last. Because Ethan's problem was not only the evidence, it was the pattern. A pattern, once documented, becomes a kind of gravity. It pulls everything down to the simplest truth. This is who you are. The third consequence was reputational. Ethan had tried to poison Naomi's credibility first, painting her as unstable, paranoid, emotional. But the women's testimonies turned his narrative inside out. Their stories matched in details that could not be coached. Phrases, timelines, manipulations that repeated with mechanical precision. What he claimed was misunderstanding began to look like design. A developer who had once toasted Ethan at fundraisers suddenly delayed signing a deal. A bank requested additional documentation. A partner paused negotiations until the personal matter resolved. Ethan's charm still worked in rooms where people preferred comfort over accountability. But those rooms began to empty as soon as money smelled risk. Morality is often slow. Self-interest is fast. The fourth consequence was legal, and it cut deepest. Claire and Dana's material supported a new claim, one that shifted the case from a bad marriage to a pattern of coercive financial abuse. The younger woman's voicemail supported the psychological pressure piece, the intimidation that didn't leave bruises but still left damage. And then came the part Ethan never believed women would pursue: criminal exposure. Because surveillance has laws. Unauthorized access has consequences. And when Naomi's evidence showed that Ethan had accessed her work communications and private accounts, the matter stopped being only marital. Investigators asked questions Ethan wasn't used to answering. Not why did you do it, but how did you do it? Not did you love her, but who helped you? Ethan's name began to appear in places he couldn't control. Official inquiries, legal notices, formal requests for records. There is a particular kind of fear that enters a man when he realizes he is not being judged by a partner, but by systems he cannot seduce. Naomi did not celebrate, not yet. She understood that predators do not surrender gracefully. They lash out when cornered, not because they are brave, but because they cannot endure being seen. He tried, once more. He filed a counterclaim accusing Naomi of data theft and illegal intrusion, arguing she had accessed his laptop unlawfully. It was an old trick: make the victim appear criminal, blur the moral lines, force both parties to look equally guilty. Lena dismantled it in 3 motions. Consent was complicated in a marriage, yes, but surveillance without consent was not. Financial schemes were not. The recorded dinner was not. The screen capture showing Ethan's own documentation of Naomi was not. The list of phases and learnings was not an innocent man's private diary. It was a blueprint. In court, Ethan's eyes searched Naomi the way they always had, scanning for soft places to press. But Naomi did not offer them. She sat with her spine straight, hands relaxed, face composed, not cold, not cruel, simply finished with being shaped by him. When the judge read the supplemental order, expanded protections, increased penalties, Ethan's jaw tightened. His charm did not break completely. It frayed, it flickered. He tried to look wounded. Then when that failed, he looked angry. Later, outside the courthouse, he caught her in the corridor where cameras were not allowed and whispered, "You think this makes you powerful." Naomi met his gaze, calm as still water. "It doesn't make me powerful," she said softly. "It makes me free." His nostrils flared. "You'll regret this." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The regret had already moved to the other side of the story. Over the next month, Ethan's business began to collapse in the quiet, humiliating ways men like him fear most. Not through a single catastrophic headline, but through a slow drain of confidence. Investors stepping back, partners seeking distance, the phone ringing less often, invitations stopping. And then, on a gray afternoon, Naomi received a message from Lena. "The investigation is moving forward. He's being formally questioned next week. Also, another woman contacted us." Naomi stared at the screen for a long moment. She did not feel triumph. She felt something deeper, something steadier. Consequences were not punishment. Not really. They were truth, returning to the person who tried to bury it in someone else's life. That night, Naomi walked along the river alone, the wind sharp against her cheeks, her coat pulled tight. She watched the water slide past, dark and determined, carrying reflections of city lights that looked like scattered promises. She thought about love, the real kind, the kind that doesn't require you to shrink, doesn't punish your clarity, doesn't confuse devotion with compliance. She did not know if she would ever trust romance again. But she knew this. A man like Ethan could take many things: time, peace, illusion. But he could not take the one thing Naomi had finally reclaimed: her own name, spoken without fear. Freedom arrived without ceremony, not as a celebration, not as applause, but as a quiet morning where Naomi woke alone and felt no need to brace herself for the day. Light spilled across the small apartment she had chosen deliberately, windows that opened when she asked them to, walls that held no echoes of someone else's plans. She brewed tea and watched steam rise, realizing that peace did not rush in. It settled. Months had passed since the filings, the hearings, the slow unmasking of a man who mistook control for love. The city still moved at its relentless pace, but Naomi moved differently now, no longer adjusting her steps to match another's shadow. Her work flourished not because she proved anything, but because clarity sharpened her instincts. Clients trusted her not for charm, but for truth. She trusted herself the same way. She kept in touch with the women. They met sometimes without agendas: coffee, laughter, long silences that needed no explanation. What bound them was not shared pain, but shared recognition. Each had learned that survival did not require erasing the past. It required standing where you were and refusing to be named by someone else's cruelty. One afternoon, Naomi walked along the river and paused to watch the water catch the light. She thought about romance, the kind that had once felt like rescue. She understood now that rescue was never the point. Partnership, if it came again, would be a meeting of equals who arrived whole, not a negotiation for safety. Her phone vibrated with a message from a new client, someone rebuilding after harm, asking for guidance, asking how to begin again. Naomi smiled, not because she had answers for everyone, but because she knew the first one by heart. Tell the truth and don't abandon yourself. That evening, she stood before the mirror and recognized the woman looking back. Strong without hardness, soft without surrender. A woman who had learned that power does not shout and does not perform. It listens. It prepares. It endures. She turned off the light and let the room settle into darkness that felt earned. If this story stayed with you, if you recognized a moment, a feeling, a truth, take a second to let it be known. Share your thoughts, add your voice, and stay close for more stories where women choose clarity over silence and courage over comfort. There are more paths to walk, and you're welcome here. Naomi closed the window, the city humming beyond it, and carried her quiet power forward, unafraid, unmistakably her own.